President Donald Trump has touched down in Singapore for historic meetings with longtime foe Kim Jong-Un. But while en route to meet an enemy, Trump's left a trail of broken friendships in his wake. Last week, he finally made a begrudging first official visit to Canada for a pit stop at the G7, standing up the host, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, by arriving late for the family photo. And then later, waltzing into meetings with little regard for the summit's schedule, and in true Trump style, playing nice in person, only to change tack hours later. He'd warned Trudeau to not retaliate, to not match his tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. But Trudeau's not backing down.
I have made it very clear to the President that it is not something we relish doing, but it is something that we absolutely will do, because Canadians were polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
Then, just hours after skipping out early to fly off and meet Kim Jong-un, Trump couldn't resist sending one last jab Canada's way, tweeting, "Justin Trudeau acted so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, only to give a news conference after I left, saying that U.S. tariffs were kind of insulting and he will not be pushed around. Very dishonest and weak." If Trump's G7 visit was designed to upset the apple cart, it sure did that. NAFTA's on life support, tariffs are in full swing. And to add insult to injury, Trump's now calling on the G7 to welcome Russia back into the fold.
We have a world to run. And in the G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
So Moscow, of course, was kicked out for its attack on Ukraine and its annexation of Crimea. In much of all this, Trudeau has been touted as the Trump whisperer, but that charm offensive might be running out of steam. Are Canada and the U.S. headed for a breakup? We spoke to Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, on Friday night. It was right after Trump and Trudeau had finished that private meeting, kind of looking like partners again. But as we've seen, with Trump, things can change in a heartbeat, or maybe in a tweet. I saw you standing in the back as Trudeau and Trump were giving their press conference, a brief press conference after their one-on-one meeting, and he was saying the relationship has never been better. But it's pretty extraordinary after, it's been weeks of him lobbing insults at Canada and Justin Trudeau in particular. Is he just messing with people?
Well, great to be with you, Wendy. I was in the bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister and the President. And look, both the President's public comments and the tone of the meeting itself bore out what Canadians, I think, know and what we've been telling Canadians, which is the Prime Minister and the President genuinely have a warm relationship. The President really likes the Prime Minister. I've heard that from many cabinet secretaries in the U.S., and I could see that today when the two of them met. Now, I realize that for us as Canadians, this does not really seem manifest when we have had tariffs on our steel and aluminum illegally and unjustifiably imposed. But that is the reality, and I do think in our relationship with the United States for our country, the fact that our Prime Minister has a good personal relationship with the President, the fact that they can talk to each other, is clearly a good thing.
Compared to the other players at the G7 table, Canada is not as big an economic power, and part of our influence, part of our weight at that table has been as being a bridge to the Americans, to the American president. And I'm just wondering now that it appears that it looks so nice, their interaction today, but there's been a lot of negative actions towards Canada from this president. Is our influence weakened at that table now if we're not seen as the bridge to President Trump?
Well, let me start by saying, Wendy, don't understate the influence and the weight and the heft of Canada in the world. In terms of our influence at the G7 table, actually, I would say that Canada's weight is as great as it has ever been. The Prime Minister is in a very important role here, holding the G7 presidency, being the chair, at a time when this is an important and in some ways difficult meeting, and he is navigating through it, and I see the respect of his peers and their confidence in his ability to do that.
You have a long history of standing up to Vladimir Putin. Now President Trump wants him back at the G7. There's obvious pressure on you to have a good relationship with President Trump. Is it time to back off on some of that opposition, to make nice with Putin, to be able to make nice with President Trump?
Absolutely not. And President Trump did not raise the issue in the discussion in the bilateral with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has been very clear in his conversations, in his meetings with partners here at the G7, that Canada absolutely does not believe that Russia should be readmitted to the G7. After all, let's remember, Russia was expelled from the G7 for its actions, for its illegal invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. That is not the behavior of a democracy, a participant to and contributor to the international rules-based order, and those are the core values of the G7. So Canada is very clear about that. We have been clear with our allies about that.
Minister Freeland, thank you so much for talking to me.
Great to talk to you too, Wendy.